And welcome back. Now that we have gone ahead and made our island, we want to add a little bit of texture, a little bit of definition, different things that we can use to help make this pop out just a little bit more. So to get started here, first thing we're going to do is go ahead and make our pattern that we're going to use. So let's go to File, New, and let's go ahead and make something pretty small. Let's just even say something like 10 pixels by 10 pixels. It doesn't have to be very large. We can even do 12 pixels by 12 pixels so it kind of fits in. It's up to you. But because ultimately it's going to be a pattern that we end up using within a shape. And I think 12 by 12 sounds pretty nice. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that. And Control 0 to zoom that in. And of course, this is going to be a quite small pattern here that we're working with. And you can see it's 12 pixels by 12 pixels. And let's go ahead and first find our green. And we want to go ahead and maybe offset that. Maybe move it a little more towards some of the yellows here a little bit. We can, of course, choose some different colors that we can work with here. Ultimately, what you end up making is kind of up to you with your own grass pattern. The most important thing I want to show to you, though, is that because these are going to be repeating, just keep in mind that anything that we do here with this grass pattern can, of course, be repeated vertically and horizontally. So that means, for example, if I have this piece up here that is currently starting here, I'm not going to necessarily want it to be here unless I want a super long blade of grass to constantly be shown in the pixel art. So these are all things that you have to kind of just keep in consideration as you start making your various different shapes in here. And of course, these are things, again, that are going to be repeated throughout your game, or in this case, your pixel art map. So you have to keep all of that in mind. All right. That looks like a good start there. And of course, I'm going to put a little bit of variance in here. It doesn't necessarily have to always be the exact same pattern. Now, of course, I want some color variance, so I'm going to go back to my green here. And let's bring it even more towards the yellow spectrum here. And maybe not quite so puke looking here, but maybe a little more yellow there. There we go. And we're effectively going to use this kind of as almost like a grass highlight, something that we can use to kind of really represent the different tones with it. That one looks pretty good there. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick a couple of these to go ahead and fill in with different grass shades. I might have just a single leaf standing out here. Again, just picking a couple of different things to kind of go in, help add some different highlights here of however I want this to be represented. Because again, this is however I want this to look. I have that ability as the creator of this pixel art map. And I might just, again, have some single strands here just to kind of help break up different pieces. All right, and maybe put a piece here and one there. There we go. We have a nice solid pattern started here. All right, and the last thing we want to do is add our shadows. So to do this, I'm going to actually go back to my original color here, color pick this, go back to here, and let's actually bring this same green that we had here, but let's bring that down in tone. Not too dark, but just a little bit down. Just so that when we use our pencil tool, we can now go in and actually add some darker tones in here just to kind of help add a little bit of color variance again, and just to help break everything up here. And I might add just some standalones. There we go. And now we have a nice pattern here. And let me just actually add one more on the bottom there just to break up that bottom because we have quite a bit of white here. And so I'm going to now make this into a pattern. So we're going to go to Edit, and we're going to go down to Define Pattern. And now that I have this pattern start here, let's just go ahead and name this Grass. And click OK. And now that we have our grass pattern defined, we should be able to go back to our original image here and use that pattern here to help add and enrich our textures. So let's get started by selecting our region here. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my magic wand tool. Go ahead and select this first region here. And when we go to our paint bucket tool, the first thing you'll notice is that this is, of course, the foreground option. And we're going to go ahead and change this to pattern. Now, we have done this a little bit before with using patterns in creating fills, but let's go down here and look. If I click the arrow, you'll notice I now have my custom pattern that I did before. And if I click on that pattern to select it, you'll see it's now there. And if I use my fill bucket, you will see that it has now filled this region in. And of course, we have the option to go, if we say, I'm not really happy with how this pattern looks, I want to go through and change it. I, of course, can go back to my original shape over here, go to my pencil tool and say, maybe I want to add a little more dark spots in here or something like that, just to, vary this zone up a little bit because maybe it looks too solid or something like that. And then all I need to do is once this is redone, just go ahead and redefine that pattern. And of course, we can just simply overwrite that existing pattern. But for now, this is going to, of course, be good here. We do want to maybe also apply it to our other region too. So let's just deselect, Control D, grab our magic wand tool, grab that region over there, and apply the same way. Use our paint bucket tool, make sure we're on our pattern, and we can fill that in. And of course, up close, this may not look as beautiful, but if I go ahead and just zoom this out a little bit, I'm just going to use my zoom tool here, hold down the Alt key and hold on the Alt key, and let's just zoom this back out. Or Control 0 actually sounds better. That'll be nice and fast. And now we can see we have this pattern that from a distance actually looks a lot nicer than just that solid green that we had previously seen. And so this is, of course, a pretty nice improvement over what we had before. Now, currently, when we look at our shape here, there's not really much variation outside on our edges. We did have a little bit of this rounded corners here, but I want to do just a little bit more here. So I'm going to go back to my pencil tool here, and I still have my dark color selected here. So I'm going to go ahead and use it. And I'm just going to go ahead and just bring a couple of these edges down just to add a little bit of variation here. And I'm just going to kind of do that all around the shape here. Just add a couple small edges here and there. They can be a pixel, 2 pixels, not anything too crazy, but just a couple of small paces here, just to show that this grass is, maybe extending outwards a little bit. Add a couple small variations here and there. And just, again, to help break this up a little bit. Now, because I do have a lot wider edge, or narrower edge, I should say, than maybe it could be, I can, of course, notice that this grass is coming out here a little bit, but that's an easy fix. I can just grab my eraser tool and just simply clean those up if I want. And you can see now those are nice and crisp. Now, it hangs over the edge here a little bit. That's fine, too. I, of course, can play around with however I want to get that desired look I'm going for. Now, I do want to color variant these edges here, so I'm going to grab my highlight color here that I had previously done. And doing the same thing, let's go ahead and add just a few small variants here of these other colors. And I'm going to repeat this process again and again for the other color until I have some edges that just look pretty nice to really, again, add some color variation. And so that way, this is not simply just one monolithic color that I'm looking at. And I just need to do my kind of middle of the road green here that I had previously done. And again, add those colors in just to kind of help break things up. So it's not all simply just one color, one solid shading. We can, of course, have a little bit of fun with this. And just a couple more. And I think that looks pretty good. All right. Now that I have this done, I do need to address this area here. Now, to make my life a little bit simpler, I'm actually going to use my marquee selection tool here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to my edges here. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and select these edges here to try and grab some of this color variation that I had previously done. And I'm just going to use the Alt key to, when I'm on the Move tool, go ahead and grab that. And bring this on over to just add some of that color variation on in here. And you can see it automatically adds that edge in there. So I'm going to repeat that process now for the other sides. So do that for the top. Use my Move tool. Use the Alt key. Bring that in. And let's repeat that again for the other sides as well. And last time, let's go ahead and just grab the bottom. There we go, and deselect. All right, and now we have a little bit of variation, so we can see we have some edging going on here within our grass. All right, so the last thing we need to do is add a little bit of shadow. And now we do, of course, have the grass, if you notice, hanging over the edge here a little bit. So in order to do that, let's just go ahead and select this zone of grass here. Actually, I'm going to switch back to my quick selection tool real quick, or even my magic wand should do it. And you notice it is not grabbing necessarily one particular region, but in this case, let me just deselect. If I use my quick select, you can get things pretty quickly here. And it should, of course, grab those zones that I want. If I miss something, we can, of course, just manually grab those pixels missed. But it looks like we pretty much got everything that we are kind of looking to get here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. And I want this layer to be under my grass layer. In fact, let's go ahead and just label these real quick, just so I can keep these straight. So I have a grass, a shadow. I'm going to call this my ground, and this is my water. And I'm going to go ahead back to my shadow layer now, go to my paint bucket, and I'm going to switch back from pattern to foreground. Let's get a black as an option, and let's just go ahead and fill those zones in. Now, of course, we can't see it right now because it's underneath everything, but if we go to our move tool and tap the arrow keys down, we of course can see here's our black layer. Now we don't want it too far down, just enough so that it gives it just a little bit of an edge here with our grass. And so now that we have that edge established, it's a little too prominent right now in terms of color. So we're actually going to go ahead and change the blend mode of this layer from normal to overlay. And when I do that, of course, will affect different things within here. So again, make sure we're on the shadow layer here. So once we have this all in place, the other thing we need to do, let me just deselect this real quick and change this again, make sure I'm on the overlay option. We can, of course, change the opacity here to kind of start bringing that layer down. And so you can see now it's not quite so dark looking, and it blends a lot nicer in here with the different options. And I brought that near to 30%. You can play around with it, find the shading that works good for you. I chose about 33%, and that looks pretty good just to give us a nice shadow there. Now, one final thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to play around with my hue and saturation values, because I might look at this and say, this looks a little flat in some of the presentation. So let's go to my grass layer here, do an adjustment, and let's do a hue saturation. Now, if I play with the hue slider, of course, I can mess with the different colors here for this entire area. But I'm going to focus mostly on the grass right here, and so I'm going to actually just increase the saturation just a little bit to help that grass just pop out a little bit. I don't want to go too much, but just a little bit so it looks a little bit richer. And I might say, this water is supposed to be a little bit darker where this is more inland, so I might add another hue and saturation adjustment layer here and say, I want to take the outer water layer and bring that so it's just a little bit darker here in some of its values. Maybe increase the saturation just a little bit. I can, of course, just play around with this to kind of get the color that I might want. And just like that, I went ahead and created a couple of different features here. I added a lot of texture, a lot of detail to our pixel art map. And so we're going to continue now to use this to kind of really start fleshing out the map that we're going to ultimately end up making.